Okay.
Okay, right here?
Billy, Tom, why don't you? And Mark, Mike, yeah, absolutely. And a couple of you want to be on this side?
Balance it out.
Balance out a little bit?
You want me as
Okay.
far away from them?
Go ahead. You're up.
All right, well, welcome everybody. This is the first press conference we have held in this room, where we typically hold a lot of press conferences since last February. So it's a milestone. We've been doing board meetings in here. We've been starting to do some things in here. But it's good actually to finally be doing something like this. It's at least a sign that when we can, and in some small ways, we're starting to step forward and get back to a little bit of normalcy and coming together and doing things like this, and appreciate the opportunity. I want to acknowledge the presence of a first vice chair of the chamber, Bill Myers, in the back. Bill, thanks for joining us. Glad you could be with us. Victor Pott, our economic development chair, was here earlier and got a chance to meet the comptroller. I want to acknowledge our local officials who will come to a little later in the program. Mark Henry, chair of the county legislature, Mike Zerlo, county administrator, and Michael Cashman, town supervisor. We have many great friends in the North Country, but we certainly have two very great friends with us here today, which makes this such a pleasure to host them and to be able to say some of the words I'm going to say about both of them. Assemblyman Billy Jones, who I want to congratulate on that hard-fought race. That well-won victory.
Hey, we'll take them every day, Gary.
I know they're still looking at the absentees, but we have confidence it's all going to work out for you. But Billy has just been such a champion of the North Country, and we're just so delighted to be looking forward to another 2 years of his doing the things that he does for us in so many ways, and for the Adirondack region as well in Albany. So congratulations and thank you for letting the chamber join in hosting our other great friend here today, State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, who I gave something earlier. I'm always kidding Tom that he needs to change his title to Chancellor of the Exchequer. Because the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who does much of the same kinds of things that Tom does for the state of New York as the fiscal person, is just treated to much better treatment in terms of the robes and the ceremonies and the perks that go with his office. So we were happy to finally get some tailors to make up an appropriate set of robes, like the Chancellor of the Exchequer. We got a picture of Tom, and we wish you many years of happiness enjoying the accoutrements of your office.
I love it.
But Tom has just been such a great friend of the whole state in his years in the legislature, and certainly in his years now as state comptroller, and perhaps never more so than during this period of these last several months, which we know have slammed and impacted and created question marks over so many aspects of public financing for the state, and then in turn for local governments and school districts, and for business and for everyone, and helping us, the state, to deal with that calmly, deliberatively, rationally, but also collaboratively in terms of sharing information, sharing guidance, and being there for our counties, for our local governments, for chambers like ours, with that information in as timely a way as possible. Nothing is more powerful in working through a crisis than information. Good information delivered timely and as quickly as possible. And he and his team continue to do that to show us, for example, the sales tax revenues, which just recently we were able to see for the last quarter across the state. And the North Country is doing comparatively well.
Very well, yeah.
And it's welcome to know that, because it helps. I know it helps Mike, it helps the county, it helps everybody have a snapshot. Doesn't mean that challenges don't go away, and there are other forms of revenue that are still a very challenge, and that state finances overall still aren't challenged in many ways, which has a downward flow on state aid and other things. But still, it's important to have those points of information and to have them accurately and have them routinely. And then he's just been such a great partner on the economic development front, just always there whenever we need our state comptroller's office to assist with anything, seen and unseen at times, to help with matters. He's just always there, and thank you for that. Next time I want to see the robes, though. It's my pleasure at this point to introduce our Assemblyman, Billy Jones, who will in turn introduce our special guest. Billy.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you for the introduction. And it's important for us to do this today, and important for the comptroller to be here. And thank you so much, Tom, for coming up here. As Gary had mentioned, he's been a friend here to us in the North Country. He's traveled all over the state to inform and to help people and be as transparent as possible, to help local governments in what they're going through. And now more than ever, we need his expertise. We're going through this downward spiral of finances, state and local, due to the pandemic, due to nobody's fault, but this awful pandemic we're going through. And we certainly need his expertise now, and it's extremely important that we have that input for our local governments, and I'm sure Mike and Mr. Henry would agree that his office is helpful. They try to give as much information to them so that they can do their jobs. And later on today, we're going to be touring some businesses in northern Franklin County that I feel really shows what the North Country is all about. Agritourism is a big part of what we do here, a big part of our economy. So we'll be going to an orchard, and we'll be going to a Titus Mountain Ski Center later on to show the comptroller what we're doing here in the North Country. He's well aware of what we are doing, but we certainly welcome him to see firsthand what these family-owned businesses, the backbone really of our economy here in the North Country, are doing. So it's good to have him here. Like I said, Tom's a friend here to the North Country. He's a friend of me personally. Always has been great to work with. And welcome back to the North Country. He's no stranger. He travels all over the state. He does 24/7 nonstop. I see him in Albany a lot. I kind of miss our dinners this year that we had, but certainly has continued to work, and his office has done so much here for the local governments. And he's going to tell us a little bit about our state finances and what we can expect here a little bit in the future. And welcome back, Mr. DiNapoli, and it's great to have you here.
Great, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Assemblyman. Thank you, Gary, for hosting us, and our local officials. It is great to be back. I think, Gary, you said this is the first press event in the room since February. I mean, that's typical for what the year has been. As the Assemblyman said, I love to travel the state. I love to come to the North Country. Haven't been able to do too much of that the past few months. So when Assemblyman Jones said, come up, and I want to take you on a tour, and I was delighted when he said the first stop would be here at the Chamber. The only qualification was you have to come before it snows. And
You got lucky because it
who
snowed
knew?
last week.
He told me that, but who knew it was going to be this kind of a weather day? But I really want to say to Assemblyman, mutual words of appreciation for your great service. You came to Albany with a very rich background in local government, and certainly a great family history of knowing the North Country inside and out. And it's been great to work with you in partnership. You've been a very effective and forceful advocate for this part of the state. And that's needed, especially in our majority assembly conference there that I served in for many, many years. We haven't had too many voices from this part of the state in that conference, and really you have made an incredible difference. And I'm really looking forward to the tours we're going to take later today. And to Gary Douglas here at the Chamber, we've had many occasions to be here in this room, talked about many issues. I've learned a lot from you. You really helped to educate this downstate fella about what the dynamic here in this part of the state is when we talk about economic development. And you have been just an incredible advocate, you and the entire Chamber team. You know, the Chambers really are the regional voice for every part of our state. And given some of the unique challenges that you have here in the North Country, to have someone with your insight and knowledge, the experience you had in government that you brought to the table before you came here, I mean, you really have been an invaluable voice. So I really want to thank you for, especially during this time of great challenge. I mean, you very much laid out what the role is that we do at the Chancellery of the Exchequer, but what you do as well in terms of being a regional voice, sharing data with folks like me, pointing out what we should be looking at. Really can't thank you enough for that. And as for this presentation that I got, it's nice to see that sometimes the old-fashioned way of paper, scissor, and paste is just as effective as photoshopping. So we're not going to call this fake news, but we're going to have this prominently displayed. I can't guarantee I'm going to come back looking like that, but you gave me an idea at least for next Halloween. So let me just get to my notes here, and I won't block any of the mics that are here. I'd really appreciate our local officials as well for being with us, because you are, in addition to the chamber, the backbone for the community. Oh yeah, I don't want to disrupt that. There, he's also our technical and production assistant here. So I also want to thank Mark Henry, Mark Zerlo, and Michael Cashman have been introduced, but thank you for your service at the local level. I did not come with any of my auditors, so you have nothing to worry about today. And you know, when I go back to Albany, I won't tell anybody I was here, so that, you know, if you're not on the radar, we won't do anything to change that at all.
That's why we use glue and paste on your picture. We didn't want you to think we had enough money to buy photos.
But really, we appreciate your leadership at the local level. Again, very important with everything that we're going through right now. So, you know, as the Assemblyman said, I'm just going to give you a couple of thoughts and points about where I think we're at in terms of our economy, certainly our state budget as well. You know, I'll restate the obvious. We've been through an extraordinary time in our state and our nation's history. You know, 2020 began as really a wonderful year. Economy was moving in the right direction. Our pension fund was at a record high. We value the fund on March 31st, right? That's my key date, as I mentioned to you earlier. And what happened from mid-March to the end of March with the markets tanking, that had a big impact on our pension fund, and obviously what it's done to our state's economy, to employment, you know, literally a shutdown. And while we are in a reopening phase now that's continuing, we know that it is a slow reopening. And especially as we head into the fall season now and into the winter, you know, what is the obvious concern? And we already see some of the positivity rates moving up in different parts of the state. This region's been doing a little better than some of the other regions, but, you know, we know we're not out of the woods yet. You know, so certainly the news this morning that we woke up to, that at least one of the big pharma companies had a, 90% effective testing of a vaccine, and you saw the markets, I don't know what they're at the moment, but, you know, when I left the hotel this morning, you know, Dow was going to be like 1,500 points up. We'll see if that holds up. But, you know, that just shows what a pent-up expectation there is that we will, in fact, get a vaccine. Because until that happens, you know, we're just doing the best we can, really trying to figure out almost day to day, how do we manage the public health crisis first and foremost? How do we manage the economic response to what we're having to deal with? How do we do everything we can to make sure we don't go backwards, both in terms of public health, but certainly in terms of our economy as well? All of that obviously has great implications for government at every level, national, state, and local government as well. So despite these challenges, I have to say that the North Country has shown tremendous resilience. That's a credit to the efforts of our government officials. Certainly our credit goes to the private sector as well, and certainly the role the chamber plays in all of that. And I think we've had effective leadership from the state level as well that's helped to support the local efforts in this part of the state. So just let me give you some of the data points to follow up on Gary's introduction. We certainly, as I said, we began the year with employment going up, and then March came and everything started going in the opposite direction. Looking at Franklin and Clinton counties, 11.7% drop in employment in May of 2020 compared to a year earlier of May of 2019. Fast forward to September, still down from a year before, but the numbers started to go up again. So a drop of only 4.4% year over year in terms of employment. So not all the jobs have come back, but certainly at about 51,600 jobs, you are moving very much so in the right direction. Looking at the April numbers for our state, we had an unemployment rate at 14.5%. September, that was down to 9.4%. Again, looking at Franklin and Clinton counties, April, 14.3%, pretty close to the state numbers. In September, 5.1%, better than the state numbers. That's for Franklin County. For Clinton County, April, 15.2%, pretty much the same as the state numbers. September, 4.9% unemployment. So both for Franklin and Clinton, our focus of my visit today, doing much better than the state numbers as we head into the fall season. You've had close to 23,000 unemployment insurance filings in Clinton, Essex, Franklin, and Hamilton counties since the start of the pandemic. By way of comparison, up 600% to the same period in 2019. So it really shows, we talk about all these numbers, but there are real people, real families behind these numbers in terms of the economic impact of what we've been going through. Just by way of comparison for New York State numbers, we have paid out through, I guess about 2 weeks ago, about $53 billion in unemployment benefits. We're not even through the entire year. For last year, all of last year, just a little over $2 billion paid out. I mean, it just shows the magnitude of what we've been dealing with in terms of the job loss and the impact on employment. As was mentioned, we look at sales tax. Gary mentioned that snapshot, and we do that on a quarterly basis, although this year we've also been doing monthly snapshots because we know how important for local governments. Sales tax is a very important revenue, certainly for the state government as well. And for those who are looking at the economy, like the Chamber, certainly very important in terms of showing trends and what's happening there. So again, don't want to throw too many numbers at you, but just some by way of comparison. For the second quarter of the calendar year, April to June, New York State was down 27.1% in sales tax revenue compared to a year before. The North Country for the second quarter down 9.1%, so doing better than the state numbers. Looking at the third quarter, July to September, our state sales tax revenue down 9.5%. So certainly a big improvement, still in the negative for the state in the third quarter compared to the second quarter. And what do we see for the North Country? A positive 4.7%. Better than the state numbers, better than I think virtually every region of the state as well. So there are always variances, and the September month particularly, there's a reconciliation, so we point that out in our quarterly report. But September particularly, again, looking specifically at Franklin and Clinton, Clinton County up 20.6%, Franklin County up 35.7%. So it really shows great strength in terms of economic activity in this part of the state. There are probably different reasons for this, right? Gary and I were talking earlier, obviously one of the unique challenges that you have here is the impact of Canadian tourism, Canadian business, or the lack thereof, again, as a consequence of the pandemic. On the other hand, it would seem to indicate that, and Gary, I think you back this up, people are staying locally, shopping locally, spending locally. So although some of your folks may have been going to Canada, instead they're staying here and they're spending their money here. What else is happening? You've got folks from other parts of the state that can't travel out of state and they're looking for places to go. Well, the North Country becomes a very attractive place for people to spend some time. By the way, that includes the New York State Comptroller. I had a lovely long weekend in Lake Placid at the end of August, and I have to tell you, I'd been to Lake Placid a number of times. The streets were pretty darn busy and pretty crowded, and a lot of folks had accents like mine, so for sure, you had a lot of downstaters coming up and spending money as well. And I think another factor here is that, as you know, we have collections now, sales tax collection on internet sales. Right? So that's been a new revenue source. We don't really have the breakout. We're still trying to figure out how to calculate some of that, of what percentage of sales tax now comes from the internet. But certainly, again, with folks being inside and using the internet to do purchases, all of this, I think, is part of what we need to understand why, and in the case of this region, as opposed to some other regions of the state, really has been a very, very positive impact. Also in terms of home sales in the region and the value of homes, we're seeing an increase certainly in Franklin and Clinton counties as well. So, I would just say to you, and I'm sure Gary has been heralding this, you've got some good news here. I know it's a tough time. I know it's not where we want it to be. I know not everybody that had a job a year ago has their job back today. But there are many, many positives for the North Country that I think shows, as I used the word earlier, the resilience of the community, the fact that you have planted a lot of good seeds over many years. And you had some years of struggle, right, Gary, in terms of the economy, and Billy, there's no doubt about it. But those seeds have sprouted, and you've got some strengths here that you're able to build on, and certainly compared to many other regions of the state, I think you should have a sense of confidence about how you've been weathering through this very, very tough time. Now, for Assemblymember Jones and his colleagues in the legislature, they still have a real challenge, of course, with the state budget. Again, we began the year with great optimism, and the state budget had to be done by the beginning of April when everything was falling apart. So the state budget was put together, and largely, Assemblyman, I use the phrase like a placeholder budget, because numbers were put in with an understanding that there may have to be adjustments, there may have to be additional borrowing to keep the spending level where it would be, and that really in many ways it was a contingency depending on how the rest of the year would proceed. When you look at the numbers and the initial projections, as you know, for the division of the budget in the governor's office, talking about a $14.5 billion budget gap that we saw. And how has that been managed? How have we been dealing with that? Well, a combination of ways. Certainly because of the extraordinary power given to the Division of Budget and to the governor, part of how we've been managing and keeping the state afloat is that there's been a conservative approach to spending. So in fact, over $2 billion in spending of money that was expected to go in some cases to local government, some cases to nonprofits who are providing government services. That money has been delayed. Those payments have been delayed. They're not permanent cuts. Not at this point, although in some cases they may feel like it if you were expecting that money. And I don't know if you had anything you would do in Clinton County in that regard. But there's been a very judicious approach to.
They have, Tom.
They have. Okay. All right. Call your assemblyman. He'll see what he could do. But keep in mind, as I said, it's not a permanent cut, and the hope is that as the economy recovers and as we hopefully get some more help from Washington, I'll touch on that in a moment, that in fact those payments will get back on track. So, where are we at now? We just put out our report that we have to do as part of the budget quick start process. We did that last week. And what we project right now for the Comptroller's Office is that our revenues are going to be down about 5.6%, $4.7 billion compared to the year ago. We do expect modest growth to pick up again in the year 2021-22. I have to say the numbers that we put out, and I guess to a certain extent our projections are somewhat updated to some of the other projections that are out there. We are projecting tax receipts to come in at a higher level than what we saw in the mid-year update from the Division of the Budget. So we have a bit more optimism based on the numbers that we've seen so far. September was up over $1 billion of what the initial projections were. So again, some good news there. It's tentative, though, because again, the obvious challenge we have is if there is a reinfection, if the positivity rate goes up, if the economy, instead of slowly reopening, goes backwards, right? And you're seeing in some of the hot spots downstate that they've had to do that. Our optimism may have to be tempered depending on how the next few months proceeds and what may happen with the vaccine in terms of the timing and the availability. There's no doubt, though, we still have a significant gap, even if we're seeing a better than initially expected projection in terms of revenue. And how will we deal with that at the state level? And this will be the burden for Assemblyman Jones and his colleagues and working with the governor. There aren't too many options. One option is the obvious one, and that's cuts in programs. The challenge when you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar gap in the state budget, if so much of the state budget is local assistance, right, to our counties, our towns, our villages, our school districts. So if budget cuts become the solution, what does that do? It balances the state books, but it transfers the problem to the local level, where you have even fewer revenue sources and even more limited options, and you're on the front lines of dealing with the pandemic. You've got your own increased costs to respond to that. So obviously that is not a bright option. Another option is raising revenue, raising taxes. Well, in the middle of an economic crisis, nobody likes to do that, and even if there's some will to do some of that, and the Assemblyman can attest to it, there'd be many debates as to which taxes and who's going to be hit by it. So that may not be such an easy path out as well. Well, the third option is borrowing, is going into debt. And in the budget agreement, there was authorization for another $11 billion in extraordinary borrowing. Thus far, the state's borrowed about $4.5 billion of that. But New York already is a very highly indebted state. So I think we have to be very careful about any long-term borrowing. The borrowing that's done so far is short-term, be paid back, by the end of the year. So if we have these continuing budget gaps as we move towards closing out the year, the options to deal with it are very limited. All of them are painful in the middle of a pandemic and the middle of the recession. I hate to say it, and many of you have heard me say this before, if not being here in Plattsburgh, but heard me say it from wherever I've been, we need more help from Washington. We appreciate what we've gotten so far in terms of federal aid. The Coronavirus Relief Fund gave the state about $5.1 billion. There are other funding streams, more money through the Medicaid formulas, money for education and for higher education. All of that has certainly been helpful, but it simply has not been enough. The Coronavirus Relief Fund money is basically to reimburse for COVID-19 related expenses that had not been anticipated. It doesn't deal with the economic damage, the economic fallout from the economy being on hold because of the pandemic. Some of our localities have gotten some of that federal money, but basically it's been to the larger entities, New York City, a handful of our larger counties, and one township, the town of Hempstead on Long Island. So one of the things that I certainly have been echoing, that we've certainly heard our governor lend his strong voice to, is the need for additional direct support to states and to localities as well to get us through this challenging time. There's been a gridlock in Washington on this issue. The House passed two versions of their HEROES Act, both of which contained allocations to state and local governments. The Senate did not take that position. Well, now that the elections are over and this hopefully clarity as to who's on first, maybe we have to wait on the Senate till Georgia happens in January. But once all that's settled, I really do hope we can get back to a discussion about what the next iteration of stimulus and relief will be. And I'm sure there will be another package. The question is the timing, and the question is how much, and the question is whether or not some of that will go directly to state and local governments. Keep in mind, for New York State, as we always point out, we are a net giver to Washington. For every dollar we send, we get back 90 cents. We are on the bottom of the list in terms of the balance of payments, tax revenue sent to Washington versus what we get back. And when I say we need help for state and local governments, I'm obviously not just talking about New York. This is an issue. It's not a red state or a blue state issue. All the states have been hit by the economic fallout from the pandemic, and we all need help. America needs help to get back on track. And without that additional Washington assistance, you're going to be facing some of those very tough choices that I just mentioned earlier, with some real consequences for local government and for the people that we all serve. A couple other quick things, and I'll close it out. I mentioned the pension fund earlier, and we took a slight loss at March 31st of this year, again, because the markets were at their lowest point in mid-March and the recovery had not kicked in. But we did put out, or we are putting out today, actually, our second quarter results. So keep in mind, for us, the second quarter is September 30th. We have an estimated 6.24 positive return. We had over a 10% positive return for the first quarter. So we're at now an estimated value of $226.4 billion. It's our highest estimated value ever. So, we're bouncing back. But the key number that goes into our calculation of the rates that we charge to the employers is what the number will be on March 31st. So as I say to everyone, we're pleased to be able to say the pension fund is strong, retirement security for our members is there, but we learned the hard way this year. What matters is March 31st of 2021. So I'm certainly hopeful that we can continue in the positive trend that we are in. What are we doing? We have been trying in every way that we can to be a partner for all those in government at the state level and the local level. We've certainly been expediting payments whenever we can for emergency equipment, PPE, ventilators, and so on. That was particularly important at the beginning of the pandemic. When there are any payments that the agencies have signed off on that aren't being delayed, we expedite them. We get them out as quickly as possible for local governments and for our nonprofits. We've developed a COVID-19 financial survival toolkit, for New Yorkers, available on our website for small businesses, for local governments, for nonprofits as well. We work with our partners in local government, the Association of Counties, Association of Towns, NYCOM, School Board Association, and with help from Assemblyman Jones and his colleagues in the legislature, we were able to pass a package of bills that the governor signed into law to provide flexibility for our local governments in managing through the pandemic. And that law extends the rollover period for paying back bond anticipation notes, provides greater flexibilities for local governments, including school districts, to temporarily transfer money that's in reserves and would otherwise be restricted to deal with COVID-19 related expenses, and permits the repayment of interfund advances made for those expenses for an extended period of time. We also are keeping a priority, although we're working largely remotely as everybody else is. Our unclaimed funds division is busier than ever. That's people's lost money. With people at home spending a lot of time at their computer, they've been searching for unclaimed funds and they're finding them. So we're very pleased about that. But I have to say that we still have, for Franklin County, about $4.5 million in unclaimed funds, not for the county, but for the people, the community. Clinton County, about close to $9 million. So I would just say to anybody, when you got that free time, because you could search online, you could apply online, including governments, by the way, and business organizations as well as individuals. We are holding millions of dollars for residents of the North Country who want to return that money, and you could go online, get that money back in a matter of days if there's an easy connection to the account. So, people ask me all the time, what's my sense of confidence about where we're heading? When I'm here in the North Country and I see the kind of numbers that you have in terms of the sales tax revenue, certainly as one key indicator. When I look at the improvement in jobs, again, not back to where you were a year ago, but certainly an improvement, that gives me confidence. And, I've been around long enough, I'm old enough to remember, what our, particularly downstate, what it was like after 9/11 hit. A lot of folks thought New York City would never come back after that. I remember how we all felt, 10 years ago after the Great Recession. How could we possibly get back to a strong economy, a strong market? And it took us a bit, but we got back to that point with a lot of federal help, I might add. After the Great Recession hit, the federal aid to local governments in New York State increased by like 60% in the 2-3 years after the Great Recession hit. So my earlier call for more help for our local governments from Washington is not without precedent. So I know this challenging time is a bit different than the others. We have this overlay of a public health crisis on top of everything else. And in some ways, we're learning as we're going. But I think we've learned some lessons well. We've learned some lessons in very painful ways. Many have suffered loss and death. But we're in a much better place as a state, as you know, than most other states in the nation. And so that gives me a sense of confidence as we move forward. But I think we have to be very deliberate. We have to pay attention, first of all, to the public health issue, the masks and sanitizing our hands and everything else. And we have to collaborate. We have to talk to each other. Thankfully, the political season is done. Should be no Republican or Democratic discussion about how we navigate through the next few months. And there should be no separation between the dialogue at the state level and the local level, because we really are all in this together. And the decisions made at one level are going to affect the other. And certainly, we have to have hope that with the new administration in Washington and that as the dust settles as to who's in control of Congress, that there is, once again, a sense of working together. And, for the interests of as Gary and Billy and I were talking earlier, a discussion cross-border. A discussion from our federal government with the Canadian authorities to talk about how we can look at the reopening. And not just the full reopening that we all hope and pray for, but are there any interim steps? And Gary, I know that's something you've been advocating for. Again, common sense, keeping in mind the public health, but recognizing that we need this economy to come back. We need people to be working. We need the tax revenue to be flowing if, in fact, we're going to get through this in the way that we need to. So I probably gave you more than you wanted, but I haven't been up here for a while, so I figured, I'll take advantage of the platform and the mics. And, again, you have a lot, I think, that you should feel confident about, that you've been weathering the storm in many ways better than many of the other regions of our state. So keep up the great work. This is a wonderful community here, and I'm looking forward to the comments from our locals and certainly spending the rest of the day with a great member of the State Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Let me invite Mark and then Michael, if you have some comments you'd like to offer.
Thank you, Gary. Welcome. We're glad to see you, as always. Thank you for all your help these last few months. I know it's been a challenge for all of us here. We've been working laser-like, and by we, I mean everybody in this room and many folks that aren't here, the business community and others. We've been focused laser-like on the health impacts and what we can do to mitigate them through the guidelines. We have been focused also on the economic impact up here. We're certainly glad to hear that we have some positive trends. We're in the process, Michael and I and the legislature, building the budget. It's always good, it's as much art as science when you build a budget, so we're glad to see that there's some trends here for that. As the comptroller said, that is due to a lot of reasons, and I'd like to take the opportunity to certainly thank everybody in this room, the chamber, our assemblyman, Mr. DiNapoli, Michael Cashman, Mike Zerlo, for where we are today. We are going to continue on. We are still going to stay focused on the health and the economy. That's important to our folks here. That's important locally. And I will stress again, I have said this several times, we need direct federal dollars. There's just no getting around it. And by we, I mean the state of New York, I mean local, towns, villages. So we need that. And I will also take advantage of the podium to ask everybody, please, wear a mask, do it smart, stay safe, so that we can all progress together and have as good an ending for this as is possible. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Thank you, Mark. Michael?
I know that there was a joke made about snow, and we like to say we put the burr in the berg here in Plattsburgh, but interestingly enough, when this was unfolding, there was snow on the ground. Put that in your mind for a moment, folks, that's how long this has been going on. And yeah, maybe we have a little bit more snow than others, but it's been a long time. I want to thank you personally for your work in the comptroller's office, because as our local budget was started to be created, we don't have a town tax. We focus on sales tax. So working with my colleagues in the Association of Towns and our Clinton County government, it's because of your good work and modeling that we've been able to put out a good budget and yet remain under the tax cap for the 5th year in a row. And I don't speak with rose-colored glasses here either. It's because of the good work of Assemblyman Jones, by the way, a happy belated birthday. And also...
My hair's getting less pink as well.
Yes, and also because of our chamber, our economy is doing some really successful things in some very challenging times. And what I mean by that is currently during the pandemic, in the town of Plattsburgh alone, over 100,000 square feet of new business is being developed. That gives us the light of hope. And we certainly have our challenges ahead, our restaurants, and we could certainly go down the list, but I just want to thank you for your good work. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Questions?
You don't want to get up and say anything?
Center again. Michael, do you want to?
Well, I can say a couple things, I guess.
You were never that shy.
Listen, I'm not elected, so.
He does have my phone number. So, yes.
Yeah, I tell you, there's a reason this gentleman's a control of the state of New York. I tell you, he hit every point with his 15-minute talk this morning. And, you know, Mr. Controller, I sit on the NYSAC board. I have the privilege of sitting on the NYSAC board. You have been a true partner, as you mentioned, to county government. Your willingness to address us, even when we're you know, not extremely happy with some of the things your office is putting out, I mean, that's a true quality of character. And you know, we're glad you're leading that. Now, if you could reduce our bills, that would be good. Yes, as the controller mentioned, sales tax is obviously paramount to local government. This cleanup, I guess New York City was getting a little too much money, so the cleanup certainly helped upstate New York, which we were happy. We are down year to year. Fortunately, we did not budget 2019 receipts in our 2020 receivables, so we feel pretty good. We feel as though, you know, when we share with our municipalities, we're quietly hopeful that we can get through 2020. We did budget a 9% decrease in 2021. We did formulate a budget, or are formulating a budget that accounts for the 20% withhold. I made a mental note that those will not be permanent cuts, so I'm going to tell everybody that you said that.
He said not yet.
So, you know, from my conversations with the Association of Counties, you know, we meet regularly with the Division of Budget, and there is an understanding that we're all one taxpayer. You know, the director of the budget, with speaking to Stephen Aquario the other day, you know, I think everybody understands that the goal here is not to pass the buck from the state to the local government. We all understand we're in this together. So, Billy, whatever you can do to solve the problem, we'd be appreciative of. So, again, just welcome. Thank you. You've been a partner with Clinton County. We've been in conversations for economic development projects for years, which I know your team's always had a willingness to participate in. Your desire to work with my team, your local team, by the way. Where is he? Where'd he go? JB. He keeps us informed. His email pops up on ours, mine very often. So your local team here is doing good work for you, and your partnership with county government is certainly appreciated. So again, thank you, and we are hopeful that we're going to get through this together. Thank you.
I have a quick question about the MTA. Do you think it's crucial that any relief bill include money for the MTA, seeing that the financial crisis that they're facing, which plays important here because a lot of those buses and subways are made here in the North Country?
Yeah.
Is it possible, or is it likely that you're going to see cutbacks in service, cutbacks in orders for cars and buses, and could that have a real impact on the state and on the North Country, and therefore should there be money in the federal relief bill for the MTA?
Yeah, a very, very important question. I'm glad you phrased it to show the connection with the MTA, Metropolitan Transportation Authority, Regional Public Transit for the downstate regions, the connection here to the North Country in terms of supplying the trains and the equipment. The short answer is it's absolutely essential because the MTA is basically on life support right now. Ridership plummeted. It is not back anywhere near to what it should be, both for the subways and for Metro North and Long Island Railroad. That's for various reasons, obviously. Some of it's health-related. People are concerned about getting in a crowded place, and some of it just has to do with the fact that folks are not returning to the office buildings in New York City, which is obviously having a broader impact on the city's economy. The chairman of the MTA, Pat Foy, has outlined really the doomsday scenario. Severe cutbacks in service, basically the capital plan, you know, being put totally on hold, which would certainly impact on ordering of trains and equipment. And the challenge for it is that it will just fall into a vicious cycle for all of us. If the trains and the subways are not functioning on a frequent schedule, people are going to not rely on the trains and the subways. So you're already seeing, it's interesting, I'm mostly in Albany, not going into the city very much because our office is technically closed there. But you know, on a rush hour, you see cars seemingly to be what you might normally see. But that's because people aren't using the trains, you know, they're using cars. Or if you're in the city, you're seeing Uber and Lyft, you know, everywhere. People are not going into the subways. So, so much of the MTA's revenue is related to fares. So if there isn't ridership, and you know, the MTA has had big debt problems for a long time, and they've done some borrowing now. They've one of the few entities that's taken advantage of the Federal Reserve lending option. But if there isn't more money from Washington, the MTA, I said the other day, and some of the papers picked up on the quote, which I developed, I have to say, not my press shop. If we don't get additional federal help, it'll be the end of public transit as we know it in the New York City metro region. And that, as I said, has implications for this part of the state as well. So when we talk about the need for additional federal aid, and I'm so glad you asked the question, it is certainly about state and local governments. It's certainly about additional help for our small businesses, but it certainly is about public transit as well. And again, the monies that is in the House bill, I think, because New York City's public transit is such a big part of public transit in the nation, it's not just about New York City. It would be public transit, around the country. We would be, I think, the main beneficiaries of that. But in terms of the economic strength of our state moving forward, look, there's no doubt New York City is a big part of our economic engine. And the kind of more positive numbers I reported on, we discussed earlier for this part of the state, that's not what we're seeing in New York City right now. So, I describe it in a very clear way. When we look at the fates in the future for all of us, New York City's future, New York State's future, and the MTA's future, they're all inextricably tied together. And as you point out, there's a North Country connection to that as well. So, yes, we want more money for state and local governments, but parallel to that, and just as urgent a request, we need that additional federal help. Without it, the MTA will not survive anywhere near its current form.
And I'm wondering, do you think that, obviously New York State and many other states have been holding out for that federal aid to come down. Was it the right move to wait this long, to wait several months, or should we have already had those conversations, that you mentioned Assemblyman Jones and his colleagues are going to have about, this is essential, this is not essential, should that ubiquitous kind of hold back of state funding apply to everything that it did?
Yeah. Well, I'm often asked that question, and I would say this: the conversations in terms of how we set priorities certainly have been going on. But as painful as holding back 20% is, if in fact that money will be seen at some point, that's better than making a decision that it should have been a permanent reduction of 20% or a permanent cut, of 100%. We get the calls all the time because, we're the last part of the process, right? We cut the checks. We don't decide, the division of the budget and the state agencies decide when they send us the authorization to cut that check. And what I've had to say to, and in some ways our nonprofits are suffering even more, than governments, because many of them were operating on a margin to begin with. They haven't been able to do fundraising. If they're direct service providers, their expectation for providing services has gone up in terms of the demand. And some of them, literally, could be closed down. And I say, as tough as it is to have a delayed payment, would you have felt better if you were told this is a cut and that you're going to be cut for the rest of the year? So it's certainly not a perfect answer to your question, but I do think the governor has used the right judgment to say that these cuts would be so devastating. Washington has to get it at some point. And the hope is that with smart and creative efforts at the local level, hopefully with our nonprofits as well, you can get through what we've been having to get through. The reckoning may come if we don't get that additional help from Washington. And my guess is that as much as people have complained about withholding of payments or temporary delay in payments, people will feel worse if it's a permanent cut on a multi-year basis, which is possible, if we have to raise taxes, or if we have to do borrowing that will really encumber future generations and limit our options down the road. So it's not the best place to be in, but I think kind of managing as responsibly as possible to keep the basic services flowing and waiting to see what the final answer is from Washington is the best of many imperfect alternatives.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.